Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me. We're a podcast devoted to founders, entrepreneurs, startups, and also angels, VCs, family offices, investment firms. Though we also have a podcast called The Angel now, so we're kind of covering both sides of the riverfront. Today we are joined by Brent Barcus. Brent is the co-founder of I-65 Capital Investors, and he handles investment and private equity operations there. And welcome, Brent. Great to have you.
Thanks, Michael. It's a joy to be on. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Brent has an amazing background that we're going to get into in both in music and in audio engineering. I guess is that the right way to
Right.
describe it?
Absolutely.
Let,
Yes.
let's start with your entrepreneurial streak,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Because you're very successful. You've been a successful musician, very successful audio engineer, which is going to blow people's mind when we get into it. But why would you kind of embrace a real estate company? And we'll talk about exactly what kind, given that you've had a lot of success in your other careers.
Absolutely. Oh,
I mean,
thanks.
you've kind of lived the dream. Other people are like, "Oh, gee, I really like to be a Nashville musician because you're in
Yeah.
Nashville."
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I'd really like to do, work on movies. But you've actually done those things. So, what is the allure of entrepreneurship and real estate for you?
Yeah. I think there's well, first off, I think because I grew up around real estate. My dad was a commercial developer, broker. Loved
Mhm.
to. He was a very creative entrepreneur. Or he's retired now, but in St. Louis, Missouri. So I think it's in my blood, the real estate side. And it was always from the creative bent. My dad was very creative and loved to, buy land and develop and flip things. And so that was his whole world and his work life. So I think it was passed to me there. And so I've always loved real estate. But I think just the musical, part was something my brother's a drummer and we grew up in a musical household. My parents loved to dance. And so from a young age, I was in the Midwest and just kind of loved music, pop music, radio, and top 40. And I was in high school, got in a band, started playing guitar, and sports really wasn't something that was. I loved sports. I didn't ever really feel like I was, totally excelling in high school and needed an outlet, a creative outlet. So music just kind of stuck. I fell in love with it and practiced all the time and tried to do some schoolwork in between practicing, and then ended up deciding to come to Nashville and giving it a shot in the early '90s and get in the music scene here.
All right, we're going to get to that in one second. I'm curious when your dad was doing real estate, were you inclined to follow him around and kind of see what he was doing and sniff around the edges a little bit?
I'd say, yeah, a little bit. I was always interested in, he would show us land and show us things he was working on. He had a few apartment buildings that he was buying. He bought a apartment building and then converted it to condos. So it was always kind of up on that and how he was doing the conversions and all that. So yeah, a little bit here and there. I'd drive around with him. We'd listen to St. Louis baseball and he'd drive around and show me properties. So we were always kind of out and about looking at things.
And St. Louis Cardinals baseball is a big deal in the Midwest, in part because of is it KMOX, the radio
KMOX.
signal?
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. It goes everywhere.
Yep.
Goes all the way to the East Coast and far west as well, like to Iowa, right?
Yeah.
So that was your upbringing. Now let's talk a little bit about I-65 Capital Investments. I-65 is Interstate 65, which cuts through Nashville or near Nashville.
Yes.
And what's the investment thesis here? What's the opportunity for you, and what have you done so far?
Yes, well, the idea, and this has just kind of developed in the last 3, 4, 5 years, is to basically, I don't want to say I stumbled across, but I found out about these groups, investors that are buying larger, like institutional grade assets, multifamily, and they're syndicating, which means they're pooling money so they can buy into larger opportunities, assets as a group. So you have your
Mhm.
general partners and your LPs, limited partners, and so it's an opportunity to invest private equity into institutional size and grade assets, and all of us basically build a scale with smaller amounts of money individually, but as a group we can go buy larger properties. So that's the idea, is to basically help source those deals get to know brokers, get to know markets that are specifically strong with population growth, job growth, where people are moving, and obviously then rentals are in demand and there's rental growth. So great investment opportunities, and find those deals and then put together the partnerships and then raise the capital to go in and buy those assets.
So it's both private equity, but also individual investors?
Well, the private equities specifically, it's either coming from specific individual investors or family office. There's a little bit
Okay.
of that. There's 1031s. There's self-directed IRAs. So there's a lot of different ways the funds are coming
Mhm.
in.
How do you find that money? How do you raise that money? How do you market to that audience?
Yeah, it's constant. It's really just a conversation, in the anywhere I go. Really, it's just something that's kind of a part of my natural, just sharing what I'm doing. And then obviously, as you bring up, oh, I like to invest in real estate. I've been in the music and audio business, but I also love real estate. And well, what are you doing with that? Or how do you invest in that? And so it's more of a conversation and just starting to build a network of people that are looking for alternative things to invest in besides the markets.
So it's one-on-one marketing. It's like you meet
Pretty much.
people and you try to convince them and so on. And so these are you said multifamily, right? So what would a typical investment property look like? How big would it be? And what are some of the things you look for to kind of to make sure it's going to be successful?
Yes, absolutely. With these larger groups, we tend to look at properties that are 100 units or above. So that's typically the minimum because you're looking for an asset that can be operated by a full-time property management. So that's kind of the one thing that you're looking for. So
Mhm.
would love to be hands off. Basically, the asset managers are, overseeing the business plan, overseeing property management, but there's obviously a day-to-day property management happening. And then we like the value add asset right
Mhm.
now, which is like a class B. It might be 10 to 15 to 20 years old. Maybe it's a first gen value add, meaning, the developer built it. It's done really well. It's stabilized, but it's kind of ready for the new makeover. The first time it's going to be makeover. That's why they say first generation. So it might be cosmetic. It's maybe granite and updating the kitchens and doing flooring. And then you're basically doing that to then increase the value of those by raising the rent. So you're increasing the value of the property.
So you renovate them, and then I assume you can raise the prices, right?
Raising the rents, which obviously is then raising the net operating income, which is creating the value, the forced appreciation in the property. And then it's
Help me.
usually not. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, no, you go. You go.
Oh, I was just saying that, and then obviously the operators are trying to decide if they want to hold it for a 3 to 5 year hold, or is it going to be a longer term, a 10-year hold, just depending on kind of what the business plan is and how they're, how they want to operate.
So what have you done so far? Have you tried out this model?
Yeah, so let's see. Last year was really my heavy boots on the ground, looking for the right group, the right asset. We closed in November on 200 units in Georgia. It's a Class C actually, so it's a little older than a Class B property. So it's a
Hmm.
little more of a workforce housing, more of a heavy value add. So we're doing a lot more renovations and getting rid of some delinquency. Trying to turn over the
Hmm.
tenants a little bit, and so yeah, that's going really well. We're in the middle of kind of just getting that kind of turned over, and we'll start, I think, distributions of the quarterly, the cash flow will start happening in the next month or two. Usually takes about 3 to 6 months to kind of get things operating and new property management and get things turned over
Hmm.
where we can start getting that cash flow.
So explain how the cash flow works. So the property starts to produce positive cash flow, and how do you determine how much to distribute to your share? I guess they're shareholders, right? To
Right.
your partners. Yeah.
Yes, and that's all obviously stated up front in the PPM, which is the private placement memorandum, which is kind of the documents you'll see of at the offering when we're doing webinars or presenting these assets to investors. It would say, so let's say it's an 80-20 split. The general partners would take 20, the limited partners would take the 80%. There might be an 8% pref. That happens a lot, which means the limited partners who are putting up the bulk of the money are going to get an 8% preferential cash flow before the general partners would see their split. So there might be an 8% pref, and then it might be an 80-20 split from there on. And that's how the cash flow happens.
I see.
That,
So if somebody uh, what would be the typical size of investment?
These are like 15 to $20 million. Oh, I mean, for an individual, the
Yeah.
minimums are usually like 50 to 75,000. A hundred
Okay.
thousand is like a good, would be anywhere in that range. So
So
for a minimum.
just for round numbers, if somebody were to put in $100,000, I think you're suggesting that from after about 3 to 6 months after you kind of get it squared away, there would be positive cash flow. But how much cash flow might that investor expect in the property you've got in Georgia?
Yeah, so they're typically going to see an 8% cash invest, cash flow yearly. Then they're going to see the obviously the internal rate of return is usually 15 to 16%.
Hmm.
So and then there's like an equity multiple. So the idea is if it's a longer hold, there'll be a refi at like year three. So the idea is to give investors back, you know, as much of their return of capital at that 3 year
Hmm.
part of the refi, and then they all stay in the deal. Sometimes these larger deals, if you get into a REIT or an institutional type thing, they're going to sometimes they'll kick their investors out of the deal at that refi, and then the general partners will keep the deal. But these are what I love about these syndications with these more private groups are everybody stays in the deal, so you continue your cash flow for as long as we hold the property, but you get your return of capital back at the refi, usually year three.
Okay, and so that would indicate that that a lot of the purchase price of the property is debt that you're doing it through a bank. Is that typical?
Yeah, usually the debt. Yeah, and obviously, as we all know, with interest rates have changed and the
That
game
was
has
my
changed.
next question. That was my next
Yeah, yeah,
question.
yeah. The leverage is different. A few years ago, there was a lot more bridge, interest only type debt going on, and all of that's kind of tightened up. So right now, we're typically having to, looking to raise more capital on the front end to do any kind of the capital improvements. Some of that is now being raised instead of going with like a bridge and getting your capex capital expenditure money into the actual financing. So we
Hmm.
might go 60, we might even go 65 or a 70% debt to 30% equity right now is kind of the typical.
And you have partners in this, right?
Yes.
And
This is a team sport for sure on these large deals. It's a team.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I know you have one of your partners is a big holder of these kind of properties. Is that right?
Right. Mark Kinney, who I really love, they're called Think Multifamily out of Dallas. They're a large one of these real estate investment groups and very experienced. Have been doing this for over 20 years, and 18,000 plus units that they've invested in and operate. And then they have lots of large operators that are part of the group. So they're kind of, and what's nice is everyone is kind of all over the country. So they're kind of looking at deals and sharing the deal flow in with the group on a weekly or bi-weekly call.
And what kind of footprint are you looking for in the sense of like you're in Georgia? Is this are these kind of opportunities? Of course, I'm sure they're everywhere, but is there a particular place, sector, part of the country where you're focused?
Pretty much, yes. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a really great market right now. It's there's a lot of growth and it's a pretty exciting place to be right now. So I tend to look. Obviously, you always want to look in kind of your home if it's a growth area. I'm looking here and any of the sub and tertiary markets around Nashville. But Southeast is really is where there's a lot of migration, obviously from California and up east, and everyone kind of moving. So there's Texas, Florida. There's a lot of Georgia going on. We're always just looking for great markets where there's job growth and population growth. So that's kind of what you're looking for on the stat side of things. Low
So
crime.
now I get to ask you about your amazing other career.
Great.
I feel like I paid my dues. I feel like we covered your business,
Yeah.
which is interesting. And to be honest with you, I think I haven't really. This might be the first real estate related interview I've done. And what was interesting to me was kind of your path into that. Um, and I you sent me a your what is known as your reel, which is the movies and television shows you worked on, and it was jaw dropping. I think my jaw is still on the floor.
No.
It was amazing. It seemed like every movie, every great movie and TV show I had watched for the last I don't know 5 years is on that reel.
Oh.
Um, and so first of all, I want maybe you could give people a sense of some of the things you've worked on that they may have heard of, and then I wanted to drill down into a little bit into that as well.
Oh, thank you. Oh gosh, let's see. I am have my own studio too. I've kind of branded all my companies I-65, so you'll hear that in my all my company names. But I have a studio, I-65 Sound, which is a Dolby Atmos immersive studio here. I'm in it actually now, but and so this is where I work in my film and TV side and music side, where I'm mixing a lot, doing sound design, and that's includes short form content to longer form movies and documentaries, all kinds of different lengths of content, commercials, everything, and trailers. And so I work with clients, larger brands, creative like Paramount Plus. I do stuff for Hulu and NASCAR and Motor Trend and Volvo and lots of brands. And it's fun. It's very creative, sometimes kind of intense, but and it's very detailed work. So there's a lot of hours sitting in the chair. So maybe that's why the real estate is a good balance, because I can be out and about and not be kind of glued to the chair.
Do you work alone
I do when
typically?
I mix. Yes, it's because it's a hypersensitive ear. I have to be kind of in my sweet spot in the studio, and I like to mix at low volumes. I feel like I get more fine-tuned detail of all of the levels of what I'm mixing when it's quieter than when it's a loud environment.
Yeah, so I know that I saw the movie 1917 in there.
Mhm.
That's one of yours, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I'm so sorry. There's so much content that it's. I think
You
so.
forget? You really
I
forget?
do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
There's a
that
lot
is hilarious.
and some of it, and sometimes it's deceptive, because sometimes it might be some of it was either fully long form, or it was certain cuts of it, or it could have been a
Yeah,
trailer. So there's just so much that comes my
yeah.
way. So
But 1917, I think it was Sam Mendes, wasn't
mhm.
it?
I think
The
so. Yes.
director.
Hmm.
And it was a really remains a kind of a landmark movie because I think maybe there was only one cut in it, maybe two, but very few. So what that meant to me was, as a viewer, was that the sound played an even more important role in the continuity and in telling the story. Was that one particularly challenging for you, or particularly fun?
I don't. I it's funny. I don't. There's certain things that don't like just because there's so much of it kind of happening, that I think that it's. I mean, it was all of them have their own challenges and unique, depending on kind of how they're recorded. And it's really just that is, again, that team thing, where it's like trying to figure out kind of, okay, what's needed here, what do I need to, what restoration needs to happen, and then is there any sound design that needs to happen, and then that final mix. So I think they're all kind of just have their unique challenges and bonuses as well from a creative standpoint. So
What are the ones that you said you have a hard time remembering some of them? So what a good question would be, what are some of the ones you do remember?
yeah, well, recently, all fall, I really enjoyed. I just finished last fall. I did a docu series with for Peacock. It's on streaming on Peacock. If you want to see it, it's called Road Race for the Championship. It was a 1 hour series on the story of NASCAR, the history of NASCAR, their drivers in the pits. It was kind of a way to get kind of a younger generation to understand the sport, and just how these drivers, how they live their lifestyle, and how what racing is like. So that was, and I did that from the ground up with NASCAR and Peacock NBC. So that was one of my favorites. It's one of the newer ones that I've done. So
How about on the movie side? What sticks out for you?
oh gosh, I don't know, the
You just
TV
think
show.
it's hilarious. I think it's
I mean, I've
hilarious
done
that,
I've done some of the Yellowstone stuff was really great,
oh, really?
and some of that was more like doing stuff for Paramount. I do a lot of short form with them too, so that's intense. And they had a show I really loved called 68 Whiskey. It's kind of a military show that I don't
Mhm.
think it's active anymore, but it was really great. I did that a few years ago. I loved, so lots of sound design, heavy, machinery and guns, and so I'm doing a lot of layering and depth of sound.
Yeah. And so how did so I think technically is the best description of what you do a sound engineer?
They call it re-recording. Well, in the film world, it's called re-recording mixer. So it's kind of the final, when all of the pieces come to you. You're like the last element before it gets approved and goes to whether it's the network or the
Yeah.
film house. Yeah. So
And I want
re-recording mixer and sound designer.
Yeah, and I want to point out that that if people are not convinced about how important this is to the final product, I think almost every year at the Oscars when they give out the awards, for sound, they will play a clip without the sound. I
Yeah.
think I think actually Steven Spielberg just did this in a tribute to John Williams, the composer,
Oh,
and he played it without the sound and then with the sound, and of course it's completely different.
yeah.
So do you start out by just looking at the images, or do you start out how do you put it all together?
Well, a lot of times it depends on what my role is in the project. Like with the NASCAR one, the sound design was so important and had to be authentic to the NASCAR brand, and that was
Yeah,
made clear to me. So thankfully, NASCAR is meticulous about recording all of their sounds. They have a giant library of all the engines and the recent pit
really, wow,
the machines, and so that has to be authentic because they're diehard fans know if something is not a quality
sure,
one of the real sounds. So I had to get up to speed with them on, hey, I'm not a huge NASCAR guy, but so I don't really know the authentic sounds of these cars, and I'm the one layering a lot of the sound in. I got to know what's authentic. So
yeah,
that takes some time. And so thankfully they have such a library. So a lot of these projects, if they've had a past history, or if they've got that library for us, or sometimes I'm the final where there's already a sound designer on the team, and so I'm basically getting those elements that are already in, and I'm just deciphering how much of each sound design piece versus the dialogue and the music. I'm just kind of blending all of that and EQing it to make it kind of fit.
And do you how close do you work with the director on this? Is it a case where they kind of throw it all at you, and then you bring back what you bring back, or
It is,
what?
yeah. No, these days, most of my work is remote, and I know some of the larger films in Hollywood and stuff. There's more on site, but my niche, I would say, since I'm in Nashville, is I'm kind of a remote mixer. So I do a lot of it on my own. Do a first pass, they'll say, or maybe I'm doing different segments of the content, and then submitting. Maybe I'll do a first. Maybe it's the first hour or 30 minutes, sending that off, moving to the next, and then getting long list of notes but a lot of direction ahead of time of like what somebody, a director or a producer, is going for, and then you kind of you try to tailor what you're doing towards. Hey, we like more dialogue, or we want the music to be more intense and less harder to hear the dialogue. So there's always kind of a getting to know what they're after and trying to find that happy medium.
So as a writer, my sweet spot is storytelling. I'm really curious as to what impact you have on the storytelling. I mean, can you find stuff in the mix that maybe nobody actually knew was there, or that is just really interesting to you, or that gives it a layer or a nuance that wasn't anticipated? Does that happen?
Yeah, I think that happens, and that's a lot of it. That could be a dynamic ride of something, maybe an intense moment where you're bringing something. Some of it's automate. They call it automation, where you're creating that eagerness or energy by just a volume ride at a certain point,
Yeah,
or it might be even adding sometimes we have sound libraries. I might be adding more energy into a scene that needs. I feel like it doesn't have enough weight maybe on the low end thing. Maybe it's something that needs more intenseness on the bottom end. So we're bringing in more low end on the bottom. So all those kind of things can make impact that you might not see, but you definitely can feel.
and how is that different from when you produce or work on a radio on a record on
On a
a
music
song?
project, yeah,
Yeah,
like a music project, yeah, totally different. It's definitely a shift. And those that where the vocal is so important. Being with my music background, I know that obviously hit songs are driven by the lyric and the
yeah.
vocal, so that's always front and center, and then obviously then everything else kind of just comes and wraps around that. So it's finding that balance of the drums and bass and the blend of all that band and those elements. So it's just kind of a different, it's all similar, but it's like you have to put on your music hat versus the overall mixer hat of a film or TV.
Yeah. So I'm sure you're wondering like how I'm going to bring this all back to real estate.
No, doesn't have to.
So here's my question. So and there may be no answer to this, but you've obviously learned a lot about how to do this, how to mix things, how to make things work together. Are there any lessons learned from this career, which is ongoing, right? You're still doing it,
Yeah.
with what you're doing in real estate. Does it feel like you're it's all part of the same creative impulse? Does it feel like you've learned some things you can apply now. What's the kind of mental state of mind as you move into this new area?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is being a team. I think being the team player. Everything I've always done, whether it was touring the world with an artist like Shania Twain. That everything has been a team sport, and I find that the more that you're willing to play whatever role is either not there yet or needed, and
Uh-huh.
and fit that spot, then I'm providing value in that situation. And so it could be like I said, a sideman on a major tour, or playing on an album, playing guitar parts, or in a film. If it's there's a sound design need, or always looking. And in real estate, like I said, these large multifamily assets, it's a team sport. What value do I provide to the general partnership? Am I bringing capital to the team? Am I helping oversee the property management or the renovation side of it? So looking for what, if that partnership is formed, what role that I can fulfill to help add value and be a team player.
And I sense that you're not. I might be wrong, but I sense that you don't have a huge ego, and that's part of it. That you don't necessarily need to be the front man of the band or the project,
Never
but
have been really. Yeah, I
yeah,
guess more of a enjoy the side, being a. I guess this. I don't want to say side man. I've always found the craft of support and the value of a team just more fun. I don't know. Yeah, I like doing it with other people, and like I said, when I'm mixing, I'm kind of on my own, but it still takes that whole team. I'm still part of the team. It's just when I'm dialed in on the very detailed stuff, I need to be kind of isolated in that moment, but it still takes it's not I'm not driving the ship at that point. I have to get the
right.
feedback on the notes on really where they see everything kind of laid out. Same with real
In a
estate.
way, it's like, is it fair to say you're in service to somebody else's vision, whether it's Shania
Always.
or
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
and on the real estate, I do like that, where if you're in a partnership, obviously, then you are part of that driving where we're going with this property. How do we see the back end of this? Are we going to sell it? Are we going to hold on to it? So that's nice, that feedback, but it is still fun. These things just don't go. You don't see many individuals doing these large deals. It's just not happening.
yeah. It's a team sport,
Same with
like you
same
said.
with films. People can't make a. It's rare to make a film on your own. So,
Yeah, so many people involved.
or an
Um,
album. Yeah.
and I sense that I can see that in your studio, the audio work um, is, it's kind of head down, isn't it? Headphones on, head down. I'm assuming it's a kind of a dark room. Maybe it
Yeah.
isn't, but
Yes.
kind of a dark room, right?
Vibey. Yeah. Vibey. Yeah.
Right. So, and then, but the real estate, you're going to leave the office, so to speak. You're going to get out in the real world. Do you find like doing what you do that's a need that you have to sort of get into the real world?
I love it. Yeah. I'm a people person. I love to network. I love doing these conversations. I love new people. Hearing other people's stories. I feel like I'm always learning from others. I'm a heavy podcast listener. I love audiobooks. So I'm always trying to learn new things. And I think for me to drive forward in my life and career, I'm just always looking for the next kind of piece that I need, whether it's on the audio music side, who can I learn from, or the real estate side, who's doing more than I am that I can learn from, or be a mentor to me or a coach to get where I
Right.
want to go.
So what's your vision uh, of the future as a real estate entrepreneur? What would, if you look out 5, 10 years, what would you like to see?
I'd like to see a portfolio. I'd love to do a fund. The goal is to have a fund where, as the deals kind of continue to come into the syndications continue to happen, I would like to have a fund where I would be able to pool money that's there, and that people are wanting to invest, and we're looking for larger deals, and that fund of money is ready to go, so that we can kind of,
Hmm.
once we locate a deal, we can get going faster. Then each syndication kind of takes time, because locate a deal, then you start raising capital, and then you take those 90 days or 60 days to get the capital to that new deal. I'm looking forward to maybe a fund that's kind of we're always raising capital, and then we're always sourcing deals, and those kind of can get paired up quicker when we find the deals. So that, I
Sure.
think, and then
Yeah.
just I love, yeah, just love to continue to build a portfolio, and build, passive income for, my investors, and hopefully all of us have more time freedom to do the things that we love to do,
Yeah.
you
No,
know?
it's such an interesting pivot. And I want to remind everyone you've been listening to the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. We're on all the major platforms for podcasts: Audible, Amazon, Apple, etc., plus Spotify for audio and video, and YouTube for audio and video. I want to remind you, we've been talking to Brent Barcus. He is the co-founder and investment guru and private equity person at I-65 Capital Investment. He's also, and believe me, he is a world-class audio engineer. And because he's worked with Shania Twain, he knows that the best thing about being a woman is the prerogative to have a little fun. Right?
Oh yes,
Did I get that right?
you did. Good job. I love it.
I want to
Oh,
say just a quick Shania Twain story that has nothing to do with her, but I was at a point in my life where I wasn't able to buy a lot of records, or things were tough, and I would go into the Barnes and Noble that had those headphone
yeah,
listening things.
yeah.
And so I was listening. I was actually probably listening to more then than I ever did. And then I had started to get money again. I was like, what album am I going to buy?
Huh.
What? And I really, I really thought hard about it because it had been a while. And I bought Shania Twain.
Wow.
And I'm not a country music guy, really. But that was the one that really spoke to me at that moment.
Really interesting.
So it's exciting to hear that you were part of that.
Yeah, it's a great album. I mean, that's a team of a lot of Mutt Lang is a genius, and I happened to just be a timing thing to be in his camp and just learn from
Yeah.
him. And
The
what a
producer,
genius.
Mutt Lang, married
Yes,
Shania
right.
Twain, right?
They were
Married.
married for years. Yeah, not any,
Yeah.
no longer, but that's okay. I mean, they've moved on, but he's just a brilliant
Yeah.
producer. So
And she was just honored. I don't know if it might have been the Grammys, but a big award recently for her whole career. So
yeah,
exciting stuff. Well, Brent, thank you so much. Really appreciate your being with us. And I want to remind everybody to keep listening because we'll be back with another podcast before you know it.
thank you for having me.